Hey guys, my name is Morgan Johnson. I am the campus minister for BCM at Lipscomb University in Nashville, Tennessee, a small liberal arts college. This is more of an apologetic question. And the question is that I'm answering is, does God care about my sexuality? Does God care about my sexuality? There's a few ways you could answer this. Is sexuality just sex, or does that also involve questions regarding gender, transgender, sexual preference, sexual identity? Well, yes, it does. It involves all of those. It also involves who I have sex with, who I want to have sex with, who I think I should be having sex with, and also my sexual identity. We're going to be talking big picture. I'm going to be offering a lot of zooming out things that are on a meta 2,000-foot level, looking down on this question: does God care about my sexuality? So, does God care about my sexuality? Well, first I want to pose a question to get you thinking. If God doesn't care about my sexuality, what else does God not care about? If he doesn't care who I have sex with or how I think about sex, does God not care about things like justice and truth? Does God not care about me as a person? Does he not care about the world he created? Does he not care about how I speak to others and if I love others? Does he not care about these things? So if God doesn't care about my sexuality, it might raise questions about other things that God doesn't care about. But I'm going to pose that God does care about sex. He cares about how we live in the world and how we view things, because he created all these things for his glory. He created us to love him. And sex is a part of life, and we ought to view it in order to love him more. So God does care about my sexuality, as he does care about other things like justice and truth and grace and mercy and how we love others. So God cares about my sexuality. The first thing I'm going to talk about is the meaning of sex. This is probably one of the big objection. I guess I'm answering an objection here, is that a lot of times we think we can do whatever with sex, and we can view it or do it however we want, because there is no real objective meaning. It's just whatever I want to make of it, and therefore I can view it however I want and do it with whomever I want. So we think sometimes sex doesn't have a meaning, but I'm going to challenge that and say, no, sex actually does have a meaning. And we all think that sex has a meaning, whether you have never had sex or really never even wanted to have sex, or whether you're having sex right now outside of marriage, or perhaps you're married and in college. I was married my junior year of college, so perhaps you're in that situation as well. But how we view sex is a lot dependent on the meaning that we ascribe to sex. Or you could put it this way: the purpose of sex. What is the purpose of sex? Why do we have sex? What motivates us to have sex? What is the reason on the front end that we have sex? And on the back end, what is the purpose? What are we driving at? What are we getting at? What is the meaning of sex? And here's the thing: we all think that sex has a meaning. We might disagree on those meanings, but we all think it has some meaning. And the meaning determines how we should use it. Look at it like this. You try to use a hammer. A hammer is meant to drive nails and even pry nails. That's the purpose of a hammer. That's why you use a hammer. That's the meaning of a hammer. A hammer is not a spatula, or a hammer is not a toothbrush. You could try to use a hammer to cook, or you could try to use a hammer to brush your teeth, but it's not going to work out. I don't even have to tell you to go do that. You just know that a hammer is not going to help you cook or brush your teeth. Things have a purpose for which they are designed to be used. They have a function that is dependent on their shape and their meaning and what they are. So what sex is determines how we use it. Even if you don't think God exists at all, maybe you're an atheist, maybe you're an agnostic and you don't think God exists, or maybe you would think God exists but he didn't design sex. Or if he did design sex, he doesn't care how we use it. I would say you still have a meaning for sex. And the reason is because you don't agree that all kinds of sex are good. Most people genuinely disagree with rape, which is a good thing to disagree with. Rape is not good. Most times we would disagree with unconsensual sex. Or to bring this maybe a little closer to you, if your longtime boyfriend or girlfriend had sex with someone else, you would probably be pretty angry, pretty hurt, pretty confused. Why would you be angry and hurt and confused if sex didn't have a meaning at all? You see? If sex didn't have any meaning at all, it wouldn't matter who and when and why we have sex. Sex has a meaning, and we all think that. So, rules are not bad. You know, the meaning and the guidelines to sex, we might ascribe different rules to sex, but we all have some rules. Well, you might be thinking, I don't like rules. Rules and boundaries are meant to be broken. There's only one rule. There are no rules. Well, here's the thing, friends. You're right. There, even if that is your only rule, you're still living by a rule. You can't not live by rules. Even if you say there are no rules, you still have that one rule, and you're living by something. We're always trusting someone, trusting something. We're always living by something. You can't get out of that. It's quite impossible to say there are no rules. So rules are not bad, because you have to live by them. Even if you say there are no rules, again, you're still living by that rule. You have your own set of rules. You just can't get out of that one. So rules are not bad in and of themselves. The issue is not rules or no rules. You have to have rules. So the issue is, whose rules? What rules? What guidelines, what boundaries am I going to live by? Am I going to live by my boundaries? The culture's boundaries? My girlfriend or boyfriend's boundaries? Or am I going to live by the boundaries that God has given us? Given us not only in creation, things we can figure out with our minds and see and discover on our own, but God's revelation to us in the scriptures ultimately come manifest to us in the person of Jesus. So the Genesis through Revelation, scriptures, revelation of God also informs us about boundaries. So we have to decide, it's not rules or no rules, but it's whose rules and what rules we're going to live by. So the meaning of sex, we already talked about. Sex has a meaning. You can't get outside of that. We all ascribe to that sex has some kind of meaning. The meaning of sex, that actual meaning, we might disagree on. That's people are going to disagree on that. Atheist and a Muslim have different views of what sex means. Within the Christian tradition, and with what we can view, not only I think I could actually argue this from a natural law perspective, but what we can just observe and talk about with even out the Bible, but from a Christian perspective, sex has a specific meaning. Again, we all agree that it has some meaning, but the meaning that Christians say sex has, and God wants you and me to agree with and practically agree with in our lives, is that sex is unitive and procreative. That's the meaning of sex. And that's kind of what I'm putting forward and suggesting to you, that the meaning of sex is the purpose is both unitive and procreative. What do I mean by that? That sex, the purpose of it is unitive and procreative. Unitive. The one purpose of sex is to unite and bring the couple together as one flesh. It's a permanent union, lasting for the entirety of this life once someone makes that. And it's exclusive. It's exclusive. It is no one outside of that man and woman. There is no other person that has sex with that person. Though at the end of the day, sex is an exclusive thing. We'll talk about later how sex is never only just you and your wife or a husband in a way that it doesn't have anything to do with anybody else. You can't have sex with anybody else and still be in an exclusive union, but it's not that it doesn't have anything to do with anybody else in the world. So it's permanent and exclusive, and it unites people. It's unitive. Unitive, sorry. Sex is unitive, and it's also procreative. It's the way every human person has been brought into this world. This is yeah, we're not in the future. We're not in a post-apocalyptic future where people are being bred out of cell chambers or something like the Matrix, if you've seen that. The only way people are brought into this world is by some type of sex. Whether that's, there's different ways, but ultimately that's only through the combination of the sperm and egg cell, which are sexual organs and sexual cells. So sex is procreative. That's the way life comes about. So having that as one of the meanings of sex, we see that sex, the people who have sex, should always be open to new life. It has one of its purposes is to bring about life. So therefore, you have to be open to life. Married couples should always be open to life. I think this allows for contraceptives to a certain point. But I think one of the dispositions we have, this is a whole nother question, really. Should Christians use contraceptives? That's a whole nother question. I would say yes to a certain point, but our disposition, what we want and what we're open to and what we love and desire always has to include an openness for new life. That's part of inherently, you can't take that out of what sex is supposed to be. So the meaning of sex is unitive and procreative. And then I'm going to put forward also that the meaning of sex only can happen truly and virtuously and rightly only in the context of marriage. When we're talking about virtuous sex, yeah, you can have sex outside of marriage. I'm not going to say you can't, but you shouldn't. There's a difference between can and should. We all know this when we asked our teacher in like first grade, hey, can I go to the bathroom? I don't know, can you? But they were really getting us to ask is, hey, may I, or am I allowed, or ought I go to the bathroom? You can use sex however you want, but that doesn't mean you should. So in order to have virtuous, life-giving sex that goes towards the purpose, the end, the telos, the goal of sex, that only happens within the boundaries of marriage. Outside of marriage, a man and woman cannot fully be unitive and cannot fully be procreative, and therefore not fully experience the meaning of sex. So the way sex ought to happen and should happen and to be true, good, and beautiful in this world is to be within a marriage relationship. And the reason outside of marriage you can't do this is because has that couple promised before witnesses that they're going to be permanent and exclusive. Again, that's part of what it means to be unitive, is being permanent union and an exclusive union. Is this couple open to life, which the unitive and procreative go together? If you're not exclusively and permanently committed to one another, can you really be open to having life and taking care of that life? That's not to say that if your parents had you when they weren't married, that's not to say your life is messed up and they couldn't take care of you. This is not talking about descriptive. This is more normative on what we should be aiming for. Just because outliers exist doesn't mean that we should seek that. So I'm not meaning to demean any kind of experience you've had. I'm not trying to be judgmental in the sense of hating you or not loving you, and not trying to help you see the good and the beautiful and the goal and what God wants us to do. So sex has to happen in a relationship that's permanent and exclusive and open to life, and marriage is really that only place that meets those conditions, where the meaning of sex can fully be experienced. So I'm going to talk about some objections to that, marriage as being the only place. I think that's maybe another objection to sex, or that God cares about our sexuality. Not only that sex doesn't have a meaning, we talked about that, sex has a meaning, But the objection to that marriage is the place of sex. So let's talk about that. I think one objection is that marriage is a joke. People get divorced all the time. We've all heard of this statistic. You know, half of the marriages that happen end in divorce. But here's the thing. Here's the objection to that objection. Bad marriages don't nullify that fact that marriage is a bad thing that sinful people mess up all the time. And that's just kind of how it is with many things. Just because someone ruins something that's meant to be good doesn't make that thing actually bad. So marriage can be treated like an unholy thing. And I think we'll get to this again, but I think half the problem with our view of sex is that we have a bad view of marriage because we've seen so many poor marriages. So, but the fact that bad marriages exist doesn't nullify the fact that marriage is meant to be a good thing. Another objection is that weddings are expensive. Well, here's the thing. Weddings and marriages are not the same thing. A marriage begins at a wedding, but marriage is not itself a wedding. A marriage begins with the giving of words and vows at a wedding, but a marriage plays itself out in the giving of oneself to the other based on those words. So it begins with a wedding, but it's not itself a wedding. And to the objection that weddings are expensive, no, weddings are not expensive. Having a big, unnecessarily lavish party is expensive. That's I don't know, maybe go and pray about that, or maybe try to have a new vision on weddings. That's just the fact of it. You don't have to have 250 people and a $20,000 venue at your wedding. That maybe you can. You don't have to in order to have a wedding. I mean, honestly, my wedding was big and we had a ton of people and it cost way more than I even want to know. But you don't have to have that. And then I think one of the biggest objections to marriage being the place of sex is I can be committed outside of a marriage relationship. I can have this kind of unitive and procreative sex outside of marriage. I can be exclusive and I can be have it committed for longevity. Well, I would say the problem with that objection is that that's a messed up view of marriage and sex. Because at the end of the day, when you say you don't have to have a wedding and marriage, I think we think marriage sometimes is just between me and my wife, or just between me and my husband, my spouse. Yes, sex can only happen in the physical act between a husband and a wife. But marriage and sex, in one sense, are not in a vacuum, devoid of community. Why do you think weddings are done in front of a group of people? Or even when people go to the court, there's someone witnessing that union, that wedding. A community is needed to fulfill what we call as what we say is this meaning of marriage. A community of witnesses commits to seeing that couple carry out their vows. So a marriage is not just something that has nothing to do with your community, with your church, with others you live with. And I guess we'll talk about this now, but sex also, like I mentioned earlier, sex in one sense is not just between you and your spouse. What you do in the bedroom affects how you live in the sanctuary, in the classroom, in the living room, in the store. How you live in the bedroom affects how you live elsewhere. What you do with sex changes you as a person, like many other things. Like if you're a jerk on Twitter, you're not just going to be a nice person in real life, vice versa. What we do is not just sealed in these little hermetically sealed vacuums of life. All of life has to do with one another. And so in one sense, how you have sex affects how you're going to deal with other people. If you think sex is all about you and just getting what I want and whatever I want and forget whatever my spouse wants, you think that's just going to stay there? No, you're going to be a prideful, arrogant, selfish person in all of life. At your job, everybody's going to be working for you. In your friendships, it's all going to be about what they can give me. In your church, it's going to be, how is this church going to benefit me? Friends, sex deals with other parts of life. Not that we're having sex with other people, but that it doesn't stay there. It changes us as people. And so then another reason marriage is you can't be really committed outside of marriage is because of vows. Vows given at a wedding kind of define what these people are committing to. A husband and wife, in one sense, have no idea what they're committing to because they haven't experienced it yet. But in another sense, you're getting on the same playing field, on the same page with vows. And they also help people down the road remember what they committed to. Remember why they got married in the first place. And some people, a lot of reasons for divorce is I didn't marry that person, or they've changed, or I felt differently back then. Well, friends, in one sense, marriage is not about feeling. Love is not about what you feel. It involves that, but it's not only that. Love, and oftentimes, is a commitment. And in marriage, you commit not only that person when you're happy and they're beautiful and you're still young and things are going well, but marriage is the kind of commitment to stay with one another through the changes of life, when life is hard, in times of many tears, and even when they're old and ugly. Because you'll be old and ugly and you won't be easy to deal with, and life will get hard, and you want someone to stay with you. And that's the kind of commitment, the only kind of place that people commit to that thing, that's what we call marriage. So that's that kind of commitment, that lifelong exclusive commitment. And vows, in one sense, so vows help people stay together when viewed rightly. And I think another objection to this is, I don't want to be tied down. And there might be a few things there, but maybe one of those is freedom. We have an idea of freedom that we think we can live out, and I can have sex with whomever I want, whenever I want, and however I want. I think a lot of times we think that's what freedom is. I'm just going to do what I want to do. Friends, true freedom does not come from doing everything you want to do. Freedom only comes from being aligned with what is true, good, and beautiful in the world. We don't call people who are addicted to social media or to drugs or alcohol free. We call them enslaved. You might be enslaved to your own desires, which isn't actually freedom. You might be addicted and enslaved to your own desires of what this idea of freedom. You might be enslaved to your own desires of sex. So that's not real freedom. Sexual freedom can only be true freedom within the boundaries of marriage, because that's what sex was intended for. Marriage frees you from having to prove yourself to another person, from worrying if that person you had sex with is going to leave in the next morning, or cheat on you next week, or be with you when you're old and dying decades from now, which we are all dying right now. We're all moving towards death. So that's another side note. But friends, sex is only true freedom when it is viewed inside the commitment that you don't have to worry, and you're not giving yourself over to some other kind of desires that just do what you want to do. You're truly free to give yourself over to the person, which is what sex is. So, saying marriage, say we agree with that. Marriage is the right context. Some of us might have a problem that marriage is all we need to have right sex, to have virtuous, God-glorifying sex. Marriage is necessary, but not sufficient to have virtuous sex. Marriage is needed, but it's not everything. It's necessary, but not sufficient. You need to be in a married relationship in order to have virtuous sex. But marriage doesn't get you all the way there. You can have sex wrongly inside of marriage. So don't just think, man, I just wait till I can just get married. Then all my sexual problems will be healed, and that's what God will use to clear me of my sexual angst and passions. If I could just get sex and have it all the time. Within marriage, there's no rules. No, there are even rules within marriage. Marriage isn't the only rule. If you view sex as a way of only getting what you want, even with the spouse, that's not viewing sex rightly, because sex is a self-giving act. It's an act of love. Love says, what can I give to this other person? Not what can I take and take and take for myself. That's not love. And sex is an epitome of communication, of love. When words can't communicate things, that's when sex comes in a married relationship. It's a loving communication of self-giving embodied act. So it's necessary in order to have right sex, virtuous sex, God glorifying sex. You have to be married, but it's not everything. You also have to view it rightly.